They were rampaging along, won their first 2 games. They've lost their last 2, but they could have probably won both of them.
A fantastic looking facility there in the deep south.
I'm sure they're going to come out firing tonight.
From memory, he was leading last week. Are you going to be leading this week, or?
From bottom with 6 points and second from bottom with 3. Yes and no. Yes and no. It paid off for them. They got a 2, double the 4 and won 6 points. Depends what the teams above you do, doesn't it?
Welcome to the Bowls Hour, brought to you by Somerset Retirement Villages and Dynasty Apparel. Today, we're going to be talking to our roving journo, Rob Davis, and Commonwealth Games hopeful Chris LeLeivre. First, though, we're going to review some listener feedback. I'm looking forward to this. Around, is the modern game more skillful than the old game? As well as the upcoming National Intercentre event. I'm joined by my co-host, Alex Reid. I'm really looking forward to this, and I like the fact that listeners can actually contribute and chip in now, because it gives a feel of what the bowling community is thinking about. Now, you said last week you got up there and said the players today, the game today is far more skillful than the old doddering old game that used to be played in the past. Now, James, he said some greens back 30 odd years ago, when he started, was sometimes quicker, and he reckons the skill level was much higher. What do you got to say to James?
Well, I mean, to be fair, James isn't wrong in how difficult it was to place a bowl, and he talked about also standard weights. So in the old days, you just had one sort of bowl miles. It was just a standard, and you throw them out.
Yeah, those black ones.
Chuck them out wide, and they come back. So, he essentially said it was more difficult to place a bowl, which I've never disagreed with. But I think there are more shots to play nowadays because it is easier. Like any sport that's developed with equipment and playing surface, we've made our game easier to be good
and let me just put this in, and I'll say it on your behalf as well. Not that often that I stick up for you in that, but you weren't saying that those players had less skill or less ability. I mean, if you were a good bowler then,
absolutely,
and you were born in this era, you'd be a good bowler now.
Absolutely.
You've got an aptitude for the game. It's the feel, the weight, the whole, all that, picking the line and managing to cope under pressure.
Yeah.
So, we're not saying that. But I haven't seen much supporting your theory, because there's another one here, Alfred. Alfred says, Alex is wrong. I like this Alfred already. Bowlers these days have no idea of the skills that were required. What was he talking about there?
So Alfred would have been talking about, and he spoke that he started bowls in 1991, so a green would have run maybe 22, 23 seconds, which, to give some context.
Is that because they were grass rather than this?
Largely,
Mania Toto and all that other stuff?
Yeah. And
look, I'm starting to learn things.
Yeah, you are learning things, and crunched down. So we think it's interesting because we think of greens nowadays, we've got good cover now. Sort of back then, if you talk to the bowlers who were there, by the middle of summer, you could hear your bowl rumble up the green. So really, it was literally more like playing on compressed clay with a little bit of grass. So of course it's going to be fast, and I would imagine that it was extremely difficult to draw a shot. You talk to the greats, Peter Bellis, he's like, well, you either drew or you drove, and you had to be really good at driving, because it was easier, if you've got a bowl and a jack, it's like, well, I'm not going to draw within a foot, but I might be able to take the bowl of the jack off, yeah.
Do you know something? And now that you mention that, I remember when I first came over in the mid-'80s, I remember a lot of driving going on. There was a hell of a lot of driving, and I've never even thought about that until right this minute, that there was a lot more driving.
It's interesting. I think it's probably a skill that we've lost a little bit. So you could argue, the game's evolved in that way. There's probably not so many big drivers as there were. If you talk to Peter, he says, like, even the leads had to have a good drive on them. And I think we tried to run a Nationals one year, 8-bowl pairs like the Aussies do, the 2-2-2-2. He said they tried it once and never again, because you'd start driving from the third and fourth bowl, and ends just kept on getting killed, and games went on and on and on. So
it's quite interesting that I felt, a good drive looks good, and it can win games, and it can do all sorts of things. But all felt that people have put so much skill and thing to get the bowl right there and sneak it through the gap and get in there. And then some hooligan comes along and just smashes it all up. It's like that, the bully kid on the beach kicking over your sandcastle after you spent all the time doing it. So I'm more of a fan of people drawing the shots than smashing it. But it's a legitimate part of the game.
It's not subtle, but it's very effective. And if you've got a good drive on you, you may as well use it. But yeah, Alfred probably raises a good point. I don't know what it's like to play on a 22-second green at all, and I imagine that it would take me a while to figure it out.
There was a young guy, I think he went up to Singapore, he'd been down, who played for Stokes Valley.
Yes.
Who was a fantastic driver.
Yes, he was. He played that bowls through 5, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. He played the bowls through 5, and he was a fantastic driver. So, other bowls, that with very little bias, what would they be like on a green that was 23 seconds?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So I think we got narrow biased bowls, which is nothing Alfred says, and he's right. So Classic 2s were the first bowl that was a bit of a tighter line than what we were used to, and they were probably to combat the fast greens, because it's easier. If you don't have to take as much green, there's just less things to go wrong. You could miss your line by a foot with a narrow bowl, and when it gets to the end, you've only missed it by 2 feet. Whereas if you've got a big swinging bowl and you miss your line by a foot, it's just maths, You just end up missing by a mile. So yeah, they probably made the game easier, and then our greens slowed down, so they got easier again. But we see a difference. Like if you go to the Northern Hemisphere, they've got heavy bias bowls, and that's because they've got very slow greens. So if we went to the Northern Hemisphere, we've spoken about it before on this podcast, with the Commonwealth Games teams and stuff, if we try to take our bowls up north on a 10-second green, you'd just be throwing it straight up the middle.
So this is, I hadn't grasped that. So not only are the teams training on croquet lawns to try and emulate the slower things, but they're using different bowls.
Yeah, they'll have to use different bowls or they don't get any turn. So you might think it's easier to throw a bowl straight up the middle of a green, but it'll also get hit by any imperfections in the green. So if you tried to use a Henselite XG, for example, in Scotland on a 10-second green, you could chuck it up straight up the middle towards the jack, but if there's a bump on the green or something, it's going to get affected. So that's why they use those really heavy biased bowls, because it makes it sort of fight against all the rubbish there.
And so how do those Pommy invaders, how do they cope when they come down here? Presumably they start using your type. What do they bowl on up there, though?
They use
a cricket wicket or something. I mean, like what?
It's just grass. It's just a lawn. A lot of the
to try and get used to your faster, because you're using the croquet lawn. What do they use up
good
there?
Question.
What do they use up there to try and emulate the faster nature?
Yeah, my understanding is if you've seen like the World Bowls Tour that's played on those blue carpets up there, they are quite fast. So I would imagine that if I was an outdoor player in England, I'd go play on an indoor
just
carpet,
to get the feel,
and just then you just have to worry about the wind, and the wind's a big thing that gets in the.
And where do you get? I mean, like if I go down to the local bowl supplier, and I say, can I have some of those heavy bias bowls, please? Oh no, sorry, we don't stock those because no one wants them.
They'd have to import them.
So you have to import them.
Yeah, or you can use.
So does Bowls New Zealand get them on behalf of the players, or do they get their own?
I think when they go to the Commonwealth Games, they'll be supplied, but the players will have had to source their own. The alternative, you'd be just as good to get find a standard weight in the club locker. It does the same thing, So every club has those locker rooms full of old black bowls.
Is that the one they call the dead man bowls?
Yes, that's the one.
Yes, it sounds quite macabre.
I wasn't going to say it.
I've got a set at home actually. I got given.
So that would do the trick as well because they've got that heavy bias on them. So they'd sort of figure out a bit from there.
Right now, firstly, before we go on to talk about the National Intercentre and Interclub. Matt Lennon, who we spoke to last week from the Lee Bowling Club, this is just a bit of a skite on his behalf. He rang to let us know that he'd won his club single.
Yes, he did, and he said that we should watch out because he's going to win the Northland Centre Champion of Champions event and get another name on the board for Lee.
Well, I look forward to hearing from him, but I also look forward to hearing him if he gets his backside handed to him on a plate.
I'm not sure he will if he does, so I might have to pay attention.
Yeah, well, let's keep an eye on the results so we could do it. Now, what is happening with the National Intercentre? Because I thought that with all the conditions, trying to get 26 mob, into one place that it was going to be unworkable and that it was going to be canned. But you've come up with a cunning plan.
Yes, a very cunning plan, and to do it, we just look back to the past. So, in the old days, our national intercentre used to be run in zones. New Zealand was split into 6 zones, and you play your zone final, and the winner from that, the 6 winners, go on to a national final. So we asked the centres how they felt about running a national intercentre where 26 centres went to one space in the middle of COVID, and 15 said we're not comfortable, which is more than enough to cancel that event.
More than a quorum.
Yeah, and I think that was the only reasonable thing to do, to be honest. We've got 20,000 cases a day or something ridiculous. It's silly to have 26 centres converge. But we put our thinking caps on and we suggested to the centres how would they feel and their players feel about playing in 6 different zones and the zone winners going through. And I believe all barring Canterbury have come back with a positive on that. So
what have Canterbury done? They just not come back, or they've been the miserable buggers like they normally are?
I wouldn't want to comment on that, but they're. I don't think they're going to put a team in at this stage, is my understanding.
Which is quite good because they've got some good players down there.
Yeah, I don't think anyone in New Zealand will be that upset at the
I know.
at the competition.
At least that'll be
away.
one thing they won't bleed and win this year. Right, what about the inter-club?
Yeah, it's still in flux, but it might be the same thing. So the Interclub is run, it's a mirrored event to the Intercentre. You have club teams that go through and win their centre championship. Depending on the COVID situation, I'd be mentally prepared for it to potentially be a regional zone thing as well.
Yeah, we just don't know, do we? I mean, it's one of those things, and the likes of Mark Cameron and everyone involved in bowls, just even down to sort of the club level of having to deal with this sort of thing the whole time. I mean, I'm travelling around Auckland here now. It's almost like a ghost town. I went out to the airport and back in under an hour. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
It's unsettling because bakeries are closing down. I can't get a roll in the morning.
I had realised that your breakfast of nuggets and a Memphis meltdown is very hard to get for you.
People haven't been able to work.
The advantage of COVID. Alex Reid lost 5 stone. Right. That's old money, stone, by the way. £14 in each one. Right. If you want to send some feedback in, send it to info@bowlsnewzealand.co.nz. Any feedback, any comments, any disputes you've got with anything that we've said, but also any suggestions for people that we could talk to and subjects that you would like us to talk about. Coming up next, Bowls New Zealand's roving journo, Rob Davis.
Welcome back to the Bowls Hour, brought to you by Somerset Retirement Villages and Dynasty Apparel. On the line now, Miles, we've got Rob Davis all the way from wherever he is in his camper van at the moment. How is it in your neck of the woods, Rob?
Oh, fantastic, Alex. I'm up here in Whangarei at the moment, and we've just been up north. And yesterday I did a couple of bowling clubs in Whangarei. I went to Hikarangi and to Onarahi and interviewed people there, and I'll be doing a story on them.
My son, one of my sons is up in Whangarei, so keep an eye out for him. He's a bit dangerous, so avoid him at all costs. Yeah,
well, it's a fabulous place now. I've never thought much about it, but we're going to the Hundatuasa Museum today, which opened a couple of weeks ago, and we're very keen on seeing it because we went round all the Hundatuasa sites in Austria when we're over there, and it's a fabulous thing. So looking forward to doing that.
Oh, that sounds like a good day. So, Rob, for those bowlers who might have read your stories but might not know who's written them or who you are, could you just give us just a quick little background as to how you got into writing bowl stories and what you've done in the past?
Yeah, well, I retired from my business about 4 years ago, so Mark Cameron asked me to write stories for Bowls New Zealand. I've been a bit of a writer in the advertising game, I was. And at the same time, we bought a motorhome, and my wife and I decided to trip around New Zealand. We'd already done a lot of it, but decided to do it sort of almost full time. So while we're tripping around New Zealand, I pop into bowling clubs and interview clubs and people. We're up north at the moment. We were meant to be at the Nationals in New Plymouth, but of course they got cancelled. And we're going back to Auckland in a week's time for my daughter's 40th birthday. And then from there, we're going to pop down to the South Island for 3 months. So that'll be fantastic to be down there.
Such a hard life you've got there, Rob. You mentioned, you just nip into these bowling clubs I mean, that's one of the great things about the game of bowls is there's such a variety of people and characters that play the game. What sort of welcome do you get when you just stroll up and sort of introduce yourself and ask them to be interrogated?
It's funny, I'm not used to it, Miles. They treat me like a demigod. And they welcome me with open arms, and they gather around, and they're pretty eager to tell their stories. And you're absolutely right. I meet wonderful people, and I go into wonderful clubs, and there's wonderful things going on with the game of bowls. People think the game of bowls is dying. It's far from dying. It's thriving, and there's clubs doing wonderful things.
Now, do you, when you're there at the clubs, do you get much of a chance to play?
I don't play a lot personally. I wouldn't even call myself a bowler. I'm a pretty casual, occasional bowler, and more the reason is that I guess I don't have the time to play. We're tripping around at the moment and doing those things, but there's no doubt I will take up the sport at a later date when we've got the travel out of our system.
And you'll be a good bowler by then because you will have spoken to everyone to give you all the suggestions, and bowlers are never they're never shy in offering suggestions, are they, Rob?
Absolutely, yeah. But it's wonderful, and of course, I was in the advertising game where I was an old person because everyone in the advertising is their 20s and 30s. Now that I'm 68, I'm one of the youngsters when I go into bowling clubs, so it's fantastic to have the shoe on the other foot.
That sounds like a good tagline for bowls, or be a youngster, play bowls.
Absolutely, I love it. You should be in advertising too, Alex.
There we go. That's cool. So you said you're headed down south shortly for a few months. Have you got many interesting places keyed in, or are you open for more suggestions? Like, how would someone contact you if there's someone out there listening going, I'm part of a bowls club, and what would they do? What's their step?
Yeah, well, that's great, Alex. We're booked on the ferry going across on the 7th of April. I say that because it was quite hard to get a ferry booking in these times. We're basically going down the east coast from Picton right down to Invercargill, and then we're coming up through Queenstown, Mount Cook, and then up to Nelson. We're not doing the west coast this time. So if you're on that route, I would love to hear from you if you're a bowling club, and we'll pop in. The only visit I've really got scheduled at the moment, I've got a friend who plays out of Picton. I did a story on them a few years back, but I'll drop into Picton again and do another story. But other than that, if you're on that route down the east coast, I'd love to hear from you.
You must have heard some, Rob. You must have heard some great stories though in your time there. Are there any that sort of stick out in your memory, thinking that was really fascinating?
Well, I was here yesterday at Onarahi, and when they set up in 1954, they had the first artificial turf in Northland, and it was a rubber green. And he was telling us all about how they did it. But they basically laid a rubber green like they would a sealed road. They put tar on it and then had these chips of rubber and laid it and rolled it and that sort of thing. And it was fascinating to hear all about it. I actually saw one the other day. I popped into Wellsford. It's sort of a club in abeyance. And I think they've got a rubber green too. But listeners around will know they will have played on rubber greens, and they're very good surfaces. And I think, Alex, you're probably far too young to have played on a rubber green.
Yeah, no, I haven't played on rubber green.
To hear yeah. And in the end, they used to paint them because they go down black like a road, and then they paint them green. And what happened is, in the end, they painted it so many times that the paint was sort of curling up, and it ruined the green, and they laid a new green. But they had a picture there, and this green, John Banks, who was MP up here at the time, he opened the green, and they've got a picture of him sending down the first bowl. Yeah, really fascinating. Yeah.
Good old Banksy. I haven't seen him for donkey's years. I used to work with him many years ago. One thing though, with the rubber greens, I mean, there are certain bowlers which are a greenkeeper's nightmare. I call them the dam busters. Like a bouncing bomb. What happens if you if you drop one of those, delivering one of those? Does it just bounce its way down to the other end?
Well, it doesn't. They put a thing called washing soda underneath the green, and it's sort of a sodium or I don't know carbonate or something like that, and it hardens into a glass-like thing, and it sort of absorbs the crash, but it eventually it does all crack, and the surface at the end, what you're talking about, it does end up breaking up, and they have to renew the green then. It's quite a common problem right round because there's droppers at every club, and it becomes a bit of a problem.
Yeah, there might be another one joining soon. But anyway, if I get down that low, I can't get back up.
Exactly, yeah.
But Rob, before Alex has got a question that he's going to ask you in a minute that we're going to ask everyone on the show today. But how do people actually get hold of you? What's the best way to get hold of you to let you know that pop in and see us? Yeah.
Well, the best way is to just my email address. It's rob, R-O-B, at robdavis, ROBDAVIS.co.nz. If you can't do that, just contact Alex, and Alex will pass it on. Yeah. So Alex at bowlsnewzealand.co.nz, or Martin or Mark or anyone at Bowls New Zealand for that matter. Or if you're talking to them, they'll find me. I'm talking to Bowls New Zealand all the time, and happy to do it. If I try and do different clubs. If I've done a story on you, probably less likely to do another story until time passes a bit. But also people, very old people doing things, famous people doing things, people that I've just done a story up here on Gwen Lawson, who's a real big name here in Northland Bowls. She's 82 going on 83, just did a story on her. So keen to hear about any people. I know at Picton they've got Alex Wiley there now, so probably I might even do a bit of a story and have a yarn to him when I'm down there.
Fair enough too. That's great, and it is what makes I love those stories that you write, Rob. And if everyone goes look at the Bowls New Zealand website, that's where they are. But there's just such a great variety of people in our community, and it makes for interesting reading. To be fair, right? So Marcy, I was going to ask you a question, and I am. And you say you're not a bowler, but I'd like you to pretend that you are for the purposes of this question. So in bowls, often we get rained off halfway through a tournament. If you got rained off at bowls, what would you do to pass the time, do you reckon, if you were stuck inside a club with the rain pouring down outside? What would your pastime be?
Oh, well, I mean, you go into any bowling club there, and they're extremely social atmospheres. I've actually been to bowling clubs when this tournament's been going on and they've been rained off, and people just congregate inside. And you've got to remember, first and foremost, it's a club. So the people are there to get together and socialise. They incidentally play bowls and do other things. And the camaraderie in these clubs is fantastic. So it's a great time to have a yarn when it's raining.
So basically you enjoy it more when it's cooled off than when the actual bowls is going on.
Well, I'm like you, Miles. I love talking to people. And to be honest, I would hate working during COVID because whilst people think that working from home's a great idea, I hate the idea of working at home. I need people in my life, and I love to go out and see people and chat with them.
Yeah, you don't even live at home, mate. You're on the road all the time. But hey, Rob, it's fantastic to talk to you. I'd recommend people do read your stories on the Bowls New Zealand website. You and your wife have a great trip, and we look forward to catching up with you when you're next back up here in Auckland.
Oh, good on you. Hey, thanks for that, Miles, and thanks for that, Alex. Lovely to talk to you.
Well, it was great chatting there to my old Uncle Rob. Yes, and by all means, get hold of Rob if you've got a story, because he loves talking to people, and I'm sure you've got a story to tell him. Someone else with a bit of a story, which I'm looking forward to talking to, Blackjack and Commonwealth Games trialist Chris LeLeivre.
Welcome back to the Bowls Hour, brought to you by Somerset Retirement Villages and Dynasty Apparel. And now, Miles, I've got Chris LeLeivre on the phone from Australia. And my first question, because I'm sure I just butchered your last name, and it's on behalf of all these other bowlers who've seen it written down, is how do we say it, Chris?
We actually got it perfect, which is a big change. You've nailed it right from the get-go. Well done.
Thank you. I won't be saying it again. That's great. Oh, thanks for that, Chris. That's good. So my first question, I suppose, is like, how did you get your start in bowls and how long have you been playing the sport?
Yeah, I started, I think it was the year 2000. Probably like a lot of other people have a similar story, family. So my dad played the game. He wasn't a champion by any stretch of the imagination, but he was a reasonable bowler. He played rugby, had a couple of pretty bad knee injuries, couldn't play rugby anymore. I don't think he enjoyed golf or tennis or anything like that too much. Took up bowls, and at a relatively young age, I suppose he might have been 40 when he started. And it just as a teenager we actually lived across the road from the bowls club, so 50, 60 metres away. So it wasn't difficult to see what Dad was up to, and just the interest sparked, I guess, just being curious and seeing what was going on over there. And as time developed, I stepped onto the green. I think I was 14 or 15.
Fair enough. Seems like a good enough reason as any. That's cool. And you had a bit of success, obviously, in New Zealand and later on in Australia. How long have you been in Aussie for again, Chris? Remind us.
I think it's just ticked over 8 years. So the time's flowing past. Missed New Zealand and looking forward to coming home this week, couple of days.
Now, Chris, obviously you've got to earn a bit of money over there. What are you actually doing with yourself over there?
So I'm the bowls coordinator at my club, which is Club Musgrave or Musgrave Hill Bowls Club on the Gold Coast. I work under our secretary manager, who is Brian Baldwin, who's the ex-blackjack from the late 90s, son of Dave Baldwin and the mighty Taranaki.
I actually seem to remember, because Taranaki was the first place I lived about 37 years ago when I first came over, and I knew quite a few Baldwins floating around there, so they're probably all related. Do you you play, obviously you're still playing a lot, does your job allow you to get out there and compete?
Yeah, so there's a bit of flexibility. It's not. I'm probably not like some of the other Aussies and Ryan Bester, these Canadians and all that sort of thing who play whenever they want to. I suppose I still, by and large, work a 9 to 5 office job, but it does help that the greens are 20 metres away from my office. So there is a lot of flexibility. If I do need some time off to go and play in things that I need to be playing in, then that's not an issue at all. And being on the Gold Coast, it's very easy to be able to get out on the greens whenever you want to, really. But no, there's lots of flexibility, and I've got to thank my work for allowing me that. And Brian, he's a fantastic boss.
That's good. That's good to hear. We're pleased. So in New Zealand, obviously, well, I suppose the entire world, we've had a few issues with this little global pandemic thing, COVID, I think it's called. How has it impacted bowls over in your neck of the woods, Chris?
Well, it's definitely had an impact. The big lockdown starting March last year, we were obviously out for several months, but after that, it's actually been not too bad. By and large, we've been able to get back out on the greens. I think the lockdowns that you guys have had in the past 6 months, we haven't really had over here. So not a whole lot has changed in terms of localised bowling. I think it's more the international travel and events that we usually hold on the Gold Coast. Musgrave Hill, Broadbeach and Helensvale are kind of the three host clubs or the home of the big events that come. The World Championships has been delayed now twice. I think it's down to 2023 now. I've kind of lost track.
That sounds about right.
So localised bowling and bowling for ourselves, not a whole lot of change, but yeah, those big events that we've missed out on, we've really missed.
And you've got there's an upcoming, you alluded to before, you're tootling over the Tasman to come and participate in an upcoming Commonwealth Games trial at Rocky Nook. Have you been able to put much practice and preparation into that?
Yeah, so we've been lucky, although I haven't been able to get back to New Zealand, and there's two other Kiwis over here in Australia that are in the Blackjack squad, so Ali Forsyth and Caitlin Inch. Although we haven't been able to get back to New Zealand to train with the rest of the squad members, and there was a trial about a month ago. We weren't able to get back to that. There was too much quarantine involved, and logistically just didn't work. But we've actually got a slow green over here up at Tambourine Mountain, which has been slated for the Trans-Tasman, and they've been putting a lot of preparation into getting that prepared and the green down to running 9, 10, 11, 12 seconds. And luckily for me, that's only about half an hour's drive away from where I live. So it's actually worked out quite well just for me. I get up there a couple of times a week, and it's actually quite handy, to be honest. But no, really looking forward to coming over back to home to Auckland this week and seeing what Rocky Nook has to offer. It'll be interesting to see. You know, I'm used to the tambourine green now, and be a bit of a challenge to try a different slow green.
Chris, it's fascinating actually with all the sort of travel restrictions that we've had. What would have happened if our government, the Prime Minister, had decided not to open the gates and the floodgates to Kiwis from Australia to be allowed to come back? Would that have been the end of your Commonwealth Games aspirations, or was there contingencies that would have allowed you to somehow trial?
Oh, look, there's been a couple of variations to the rules. At one point, it was just not an option for any international travel. And if that was still the case, gee whiz, you'd have to ask the selectors what they would have done there. I think it would have been a real stretch to be able to pick players that the selectors basically hadn't seen with their own eyes playing for 2 years. You know, that's a real stretch. Luckily for us, that hasn't happened. There was, until Jacinda made her announcement last week to discontinue the home quarantine, I was prepared to come over and do whatever it took with it, whether that meant 2 weeks in a hotel before the trials. I'm in the position where I needed to be doing that and was more than prepared to do that. But luckily enough, things have opened up, and I'm now able to come over just a couple of days before, spend 2 or 3 days on the greens, and then get into it. So fortunate that we're not in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredible time to be alive, isn't it? I don't really have much else to say. So, yeah, you trial at Rocky Nook with the Blackjack squad, I suppose, that you haven't seen, like you say, in a couple of years. Do you have any expectations of what the atmosphere's going to be like for that trial, Chris?
Yeah, look, it'll be good to catch up with some of the other squad members. Haven't seen the majority of them for over 2 years, so be nice to reconnect with everyone there. But in terms, I'm not feeling left out at all. I mean, when I'm over here, I'm playing week in, week out against the best in the world and in the Queensland Premier League. So it's not as if I'm left out in the wilderness whatsoever. I've probably been having more competitive play than what the New Zealand-based players have been able to get. So, but it'll just be good to see all the Kiwis again, I suppose.
Rightly so too. Okay, so we've got one more question. We've asked it of everyone so far, and it's a good bowls question. So in New Zealand, we get rained off a little bit, as you'll know, when we're trying to play bowls. When you get rained off during a tournament, what's your pastime of choice? What do you do to pass the time waiting to get back out on the greens?
Well, I grew up in the days at the bowls clubs where everyone played euchre. But I could never get into it. I could never get into the euchre. Gee whiz, it's just sitting around being bored, really. Sometimes if the rain delay's big enough, and depending if a hotel's close enough or if home's close enough, I like to get out of the bowls club, to be honest. There's nothing worse than sitting around a bowls club all day waiting for it to rain. But yeah, there's been some horror stories about people leaving the venue and the rain stops and they're not back in time to recommence their match. some legendary stories there. I think Nick Unkovic was disqualified from the tournament once there, but look, there's nothing worse.
So I'll tell you what, Chris. You mentioned Nick Unkovic, and he's a name that I think he's generated more stories and folklore in bowls than anyone else, apart from maybe Gary Lawson, who took over his record of national titles. Chris, thank you so much for your time. We know it's early in the morning over there, and you've got to get into work and slave away until 5 o'clock. We look forward to seeing you over here on this side of the Tasman, and all the best at the Rocky Nook trials.
Been a pleasure, Miles. Thanks, Alex. Cheers.
I really enjoyed that chat with Chris. He sounds very upbeat and positive. And I was just thinking when he was saying about the competition, like we're worried about him being over there, he's actually got an advantage. I mean, the Aucklanders over here they had a 107-day lockdown, there's tournaments being canned, they couldn't go here, they couldn't go there. Meanwhile, he's over there, even in his local area, in the Queensland one, where they've been allowed to play, he's been playing some of the best players in the world.
Yeah, it was great, and I must say I was impressed with how enthusiastic he sounded at that time of the morning, because if you interviewed me at that time of the morning, I'm not sure if I would be have quite that.
I mean, you look half asleep no matter what time of day it is.
Yeah,
but I just put that down to you being a young man. I've got kids your age and older, and that's what I put it down to. Another thing that impressed me with Chris was when I asked him about the quarantine and MIQ and would that have sort of stopped him coming out. He was willing to invest his personal finances in there to spend 2 weeks in MIQ just to have a chance at being in this side. And that, to me,
it's pretty motivated.
It's very motivated. And if I was some of the other players going to Rocky Nook, I'd be a little bit worried that this guy's coming over pumped.
I'm interested to see. I'm really looking forward to seeing what teams we end up flicking over to the Commonwealth Games, because we've got so many motivated individuals, the men's and the women's side. There's probably 15 men and 15 women who all have a legitimate, you could send any mixture of that through.
How many of them are going actually in the end? How many are in the squad that actually go to the games?
5 each, 5 men and 5 women.
5 men, 5 women. Any reserves, or is the reserves included in that?
I don't believe there's a travelling reserve.
No, there's no travelling. It's a long way to go, isn't it? And a lot of expense to take another a couple over there, because I was thinking that you could probably, with the bowlers that we've got floating around at the moment, even in my sort of layman's sort of observations, you could probably send 2 or 3 teams over there that would represent the country really well. I'm glad I'm not a selector, because
no, I wouldn't do it.
There's such, I mean, there's the odd one that you wouldn't mind dropping, but most of them are such nice people that you wouldn't. I don't like doing that. I don't like having to sack anyone.
I think I'd have to contract out the phone calls.
Yeah,
just pay someone some money to
do the delegation
to deliver the bad news.
Yeah, just awful. But anyway, so Chris is going to be over. So when are those Rocky Nook trials?
Next weekend. So this weekend coming up, so in a few days' time at Rocky Nook the trials are. We'd rather people not come down and watch, just for all the reasons, but it'll be...
Is that just for COVID reasons?
Well, COVID reasons, but also I'm not sure if the players would want people to be coming in. You might be getting a sneaky peek. There might be some spies from one of the other Commonwealth countries. That might be a concern.
They're surely not going to send spies
over
here.
Say that firmly tongue-in-cheek.
I know, but what they don't want, I mean, I reckon you should allow people go in and make them feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
I was pleased.
Have you ever been to Birmingham?
No, I haven't.
God, you've got to be tough to even just go there for a visit, let alone sort of engage in sporting competition. When I used to go there watching West Ham, they used to throw bricks at us and big chance of Cockney scum get out of Brum. It was still ringing in my ears. It is stressful. So if you can't handle a bit of people looking at you at Rocky Nook, you shouldn't be going over to Birmingham. So when will we? Do you know, Alex? When we'll know the final team? Is there a date set to announce the team?
So there's no firm date yet. Because it's not our team, it's the New Zealand Olympic Committee's team. So we have to, or the selectors will pick 5 men and 5 women and nominate them to the New Zealand Olympic Committee, and the committee will either go, yep, or nah. But they usually go, yep, it's just
Yeah, but why? I mean, who are they to suddenly go, oh no, I don't like him. I don't like the colour of his shorts or something.
It's a bit like the Queen being able to dissolve Parliament. I think it's something that they can do, but they don't.
But they don't. Yeah.
And then they're in control of when the teams are announced, so they will let us know when we're allowed to tell people who aren't in that 5 that they're in the Commonwealth Games.
Just showing what a bad interviewer was, I've just thought of a question that I should have asked Chris, is will he get a chance to have a little practice on that Rocky Nook green before he starts going into the trials? Because those other players, most of them, have already had a crack at it.
Yeah, I'd expect that he would. I think he's here in time, so I'd expect that he'll be nipping out to Rocky Nook and having to roll up and back a few times to get the feel for it. But it's going to be a good trial, and I'm really looking forward to. I've
just got good feeling about the. I mean, I know there's so many quality bowlers around the world, but I've got a good feeling about this, that I think there's going to be some medals coming back, and it's about time the blokes stood up because the women have been carrying them for ages. Well, thank you very much indeed for... Oh, no, wait a minute, I've got a question for you first.
Yes.
You've asked everyone else.
Yes.
What do you do if it's raining?
Yeah, so that's why I started playing darts miles when I took up outdoor bowls, because I used to get bored out of my brain sitting in, it's raining, you're sitting inside. I'm not good at cards, and I don't like participating in something I'm not going to have a chance at winning, and I always lose at cards, so I'll heckle a card player, but I won't play. So I bought myself a set of darts and chucked it at the board, and so that's what I do when it rains. I just go and... Having
seen you play darts, you must have been at a lot of tournaments that got rained
out. Lots of rain.
Because you're pretty decent at it. In fact, I'm going to have practicing, because I think I'm going to take you on, see if I can knock this sort of cocky youth down a couple of pegs.
We'll see.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for this episode of the Bowls Hour. This is the show for all things bowls. Don't forget, share this podcast far and wide. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, Facebook, and of course the Bowls New Zealand website. We're everywhere. If you want to chip in, if you want us to interview one of your club members or you've got a story for us, info@bowlsnewzealand.co.nz. Tune in next week for more scintillating conversation. Until then, roll on.
They were rampaging along, won their first 2 games. They've lost their last 2, but they could have probably won both of them.
A fantastic looking facility there in the deep south.
I'm sure they're going to come out firing tonight.
From memory, he was leading last week. Are you going to be leading this week, or...?
From bottom with 6 points and second from bottom with 3. Yes and no. Yes and no. It paid off for them. They got a 2, double the 4 and won 6 points. Depends what the teams above you do, doesn't it?
The Bowls Hour, brought to you by Somerset Retirement Villages and Dynasty Apparel.